The Law and You. A look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You. Presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC. And brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 823, coming to you on Monday the 18th of April 2016. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic, the Canouan Project, Part 3. But before getting into the topic, a few preliminary comments. Firstly, I would like to apologize most sincerely for not having had a live program last week, Monday. Because of circumstances entirely beyond my control, I do apologize, and I know that many of you look forward to The Law and You, and when you don't see a fresh program, you feel somewhat disappointed. But on the other hand, those who had missed the previous program got a chance to see the repeat. I want to thank the technicians here at SVG-TV for accommodating me with repeat programs whenever on the rare occasion I am unable to make it live. Now, when I say live, I don't mean I'm speaking on the TV as you see me. The programs are taped, but they are taped during Monday afternoon and shown in the night at 8:30 p.m. But by live, I mean a fresh program, all right? Now, I'd like to begin by sending out condolences to all families which have suffered recent bereavements, and the families whose children or relative were lost to drowning and which these victims were laid to rest in the course of last week. We had the young Mr. Latham from the grammar school, 15 years old, who unfortunately drowned in Beckway, and Miss George, 23. I did meet the mother of Miss George when she came to St. Elizabeth Church early in the week to ask the Patriarch Edmund John, to have the church used for the funeral service. And I was so saddened by the news. I hadn't heard about that drowning before the young lady appeared at the premises. And it is always sad when a young man, 15 years old, loses his life in accidental circumstances. And I saw the pictures of even the headmaster shedding tears. Very, very distraught they were. All the boys from the grammar school, my old alma mater, my sympathy goes out to all families. And you know, who knows it, feels it. Until you have had a sudden bereavement in your family, many of you don't understand what it is to lose somebody suddenly, accidentally, like that. It's different when somebody is lying in bed or in hospital, ailing, and you have a chance to say farewell to them. But when you get sudden news of a death, it just takes the life out of you. So my sympathies to all concerned. Now, I want to issue a reminder to members of the Spiritual Baptist Archdiocese in all churches throughout St. Vincent and Grenadines of the Requiem Mass, which has been arranged for Sunday coming, this Sunday coming, the 24th of April. There will be a Requiem Mass at St. Elizabeth Cathedral at Belmont starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. Note, there was a previous announcement that the service was going to be in the afternoon. That is not so. The service will be at 9 o'clock Sunday morning at St. Elizabeth Belmont, where we would remember all the stalwarts of the faith who have passed on, some recently, some a long time ago, but all have contributed to the growth of the spiritual Baptist faith in St. Vincent of Grenadines, so that the churches which are coming from afar off would make their proper transportation arrangements. Excuse me. Now, I would like to let you know that the topic for next week's program, DV, will be child abuse. You know, this month is Child Abuse Awareness Month, and they have been requested to do a program on the topic in the month of April. So I will be bringing to you a topic on child abuse next week, Monday night, DV. Let me say welcome to the members of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court Court of Appeal. The court began its sittings in St. Vincent, sitting for the week. This morning, as we know, the court comes to St. Vincent and Grenadines 3 times a year, sometimes twice, and holds sittings. In our judicial system, appeals go from the family court, from the various magistrates' court, and from the High Court to the Court of Appeal. And when they come, they sit for a week at a time, and then they move on. There's usually a break, and then the following week, they go to another territory in the circuit. Welcome to Madam Chief Justice and the Justices of Appeal. Finally, for preliminaries. A few days ago, there was a fire at the old Treasury building on Halifax Street, popularly known as Back Street, where the old Treasury used to be. Thankfully, the fire was put out by the efforts of the fire brigade, and it did not spread. But the buildings immediately overlooking Back Street were affected by the fire, and the authorities have seen it fit to put a rope barring off the sidewalk from pedestrian traffic to avoid any pedestrian being damaged by any sudden falling of a piece of burnt timber, because when you look up from Back Street, you can still see some of the timbers which were burnt. So, in typical style, the sidewalk has been barred off, leaving pedestrians to go into the main road or to use the gutter if they are walking along the sidewalk from underneath the post office gallery to underneath the income tax gallery. If you walk along that sidewalk, you come upon the rope which has barred off the sidewalk, and your choice is to go into the road to risk being knocked down by vehicular traffic. Now, the first morning after the fire, when I saw that, I said, well, very soon they are going to put some barrier or put some temporary board over the gutter so that pedestrians can walk in safety. But alas, it has been several days, and every time I drive up a long back street, I have to be very careful because there are people going and coming along the sidewalk and they have to come down into the road. Now, I would appeal to the authorities to take some measure to make it safe for pedestrians to continue to use that part of the sidewalk. We don't want any accidents to happen. So I hope those who are responsible would do something about that. It's one refrains from using strong language, but it is really a disgrace. Anyway, the Canouan Project, Part 3. As I had intimated to you week before the last, the Canouan Lease Ratification Act was duly passed by the Parliament of this country to give legal effect to a lease dated the 31st of October 1990 between the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Canouan Resorts Development Limited. As I also indicated to you, it is my understanding that a matter is before the High Court involving an injunction which had been granted apparently some 16 years ago against an individual, and there was an incident a few weeks ago in which persons are alleged to have blocked one of the entrances to the resort. And I made the comment that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, all beaches are public beaches. So you can take a boat and go to any beach in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but getting to a beach by land involves several legal questions. The first being whether there is a public right-of-way to the beach. Where the beach is bordered by Crown lands, there's normally no problem. It's government lands and people walk through government lands. But where the land which lies adjacent to a beach is private property, then different considerations apply. So that it is always vital to determine whether there has been a public right-of-way leading to a beach. And this is a question of fact. Now, we have a law called the Prescription Act. And one of the provisions of that act is that if the public have been using a particular path or road for 20 years, continuously and without interruption, that path or road becomes a public right-of-way. So in every case of dispute, it is always important for evidence to be brought to show whether the alleged right-of-way had been in use by the public without let or hindrance for 20 years or more. And if that path or roadway is through private lands and the public right-of-way has been established, then the owners of the lands on both sides of the roadway cannot stop the public using it. Now let me pause here to emphasize that I am not saying that the public have a right to walk through private land to get to a beach. I'm saying if they have been walking through such lands for 20 years at least, continuously without any barring up of the roadway or the path by the owner of the land, then the public would be held to have acquired a public right-of-way. Now, the lease which was made in 1990 by the government is a lease with which I am acquainted. As I told you before, I was the Attorney General at the time. Mr. Mitchell, the Prime Minister, had sent me to negotiate with the developers in New York and in Miami. The negotiations took place over a fairly long period of time, and when eventually the lease was signed on the 31st of August 1990, it was signed by Mr. Mitchell on behalf of the government, and I signed as witness to Mr. Mitchell's signature. What the government was intending to do at the time was to make available to the Canouan developers a considerable portion of Canouan on certain terms and conditions for development. The lease is a long document, and those who want to read it could go to chapter 139 of the revised laws of St. Vincent and Grenadines 2009. Many of the provisions of the lease are very intense and intricate. But basically, and I want to confine the rest of my remarks to the portions of Canouan which were leased out to the developers, and the question of access to the beaches. It is not true to say, as I have heard some people say, that the public have the right to walk to any beach in Canouan. Nor is it true to say that the developers have the right to stop the public walking to every beach in Canouan. Because there would be some beaches over which the public had acquired rights of way by 1990, and there would be some beaches over which they would not have acquired rights of way. Which is which? Well, that depends on evidence. As I said before, getting to any beach by boat is the right of any member of the public. You can go and have a picnic going there by boat to any beach. Nobody can stop you and tell you, well, this is part of the developer's property. But as to whether you, the members of the public, have the right to walk through the resort to go to a beach depends on whether where you are planning to walk was or was not a public right of way. You see, when the government negotiated the lease with the developers, the government surrendered its rights to the areas that were leased. But as to whether the government had a right to have persons pass through a particular area and over a particular pathway is a question of fact. It would depend on what usage had been made of that particular roadway or path before the development took place, before the lease was signed. Because if the public had acquired a right-of-way over the land when it was government land, let me repeat, if by the time the lease was signed in 1990, the public had acquired a right-of-way by 20 years continuous and uninterrupted usage of a pathway, then when the government signed the lease in 1990, it could not have given away the right-of-way. It could not have leased the right-of-way if a right-of-way had been established. The government could only lease what it was capable of leasing, and if the public had already acquired a right to use a particular road because they had been using it for more than 20 years, that right would have survived the lease. So the developers would have taken the lease with that right intact. But it is a question of evidence as to whether that right existed as a public right-of-way or not. Let me direct you to what the lease was trying to achieve. The lease recited that was made on the 31st October between the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines and the Canouan developers, Canouan Resource Development Limited, okay? It says, whereas the island of Canouan is currently substantially owned by and under the sovereignty of the lessor, and for lessor I will read government, and for lessee I will say the developers. But the law says lessor and lessee. I will say government and developers so that you could understand it better. Okay, whereas the developers desire to lease from the government certain portions of the island for the purpose of constructing and operating a first-class international residential resort and club of distinctive character called the project, and whereas the developers will prepare a master development plan for the project outlining the major components of the project, which is to be constructed in several stages over the term of this lease, and which plan will be initialed by the parties and annexed to this lease as an appendix. Now, therefore, in consideration of the premises and the mutual covenants and provisions of this lease, the parties agree as follows. 1. Definitions. 2. Premises. And I will read the first part of clause 2. The government hereby leases unto the developers all those pieces or parcels of land on the island as follows: lying north of the demarcation line shown on the map annexed hereto as Appendix A, together with the government's interest, if any, in and to 1. All strips and gores abutting or adjacent to the foregoing parcels, and 2. All rights, lights, liberties, privileges, easements, and appurtenances belonging or reputed to belong or to be appurtenant thereto, or in any wise appertaining thereto. So the lease said whatever rights the government had in the demarked portions of land, it leased to the developers. But it first had to be established if the government had rights in a particular pathway or roadway. So that there is ample scope for discussion and negotiation. Surveys have to be carried out to try to determine where there are public rights of way and where there are not, in accordance with the Prescription Act. So there's nothing automatic about the right of the developers to bar people going to a beach, nor is there anything automatic about the rights of the people of Canouan to go to any beach they feel like through the land which has been leased to the developers. And what I would imagine the parties ought to do at this time is to have the whole area mapped out so as to determine conclusively which areas the public can pass and repass over and which areas they cannot, so that they could only go by boat to have their picnics. Confrontation does not solve the problem. We are interested as a nation in having the investment in Canouan for many economic reasons. And where the developers have spent so many millions of dollars in the development, they have a right to be allowed to recoup their investment and to make a profit if possible. But what the developers do not have is the right to deny the public of what I would say their ancient rights, their prescriptive rights, if such prescriptive rights exist, going along the land to particular beaches. And this is what the parties ought to sit down and calmly negotiate. You see, when structures are built on territory, those structures are there for good. The developers and the people to whom they have granted licenses to hold subleases, or in some cases to hold freehold, they can't remove a single building from Canouan. So anything built there must be regarded as permanent, part of the capital stock of St. Vincent and the Grenadines through Canouan. Our interest in the areas of Canouan which have been leased by the government, when I say I mean as the national interest, lies in having a resort properly run, attracting persons who are wealthy, so that in turn this wealth could be used for the benefit of Vincentians living and working in Canouan. The developers have to show sensitivity to national concerns. Nationals have to show sensitivity to the financial concerns of developers. So Canouan is not a problem to be ignored. It is not territory over which certain members of the public can claim rights if those rights did not exist. nor can the developers refuse to recognize the exercise by Vincentians of what the law would have regarded as their rights to certain areas, at least to go through and over certain areas in Canouan. I am glad to hear that attempts have been made to discuss the problem, and I hope those attempts would be successful. But we have to learn to manage conflict, and it seems to me that Canouan presents both a challenge and an opportunity so that we can achieve a workable solution in keeping with the desires of the people of St. Vincent and Grenadines to enjoy certain beaches in Canouan and the desires of the developers to carry on their development as a profit-making venture. So that brings me to the end of the program. As I said before, I commend the whole lease, Chapter 139, to all those who have a genuine interest in the question of Canouan. And next week, Monday, DB, I will speak to you on the question of child abuse. So that is all from this program, The Law and You, program number 823. I look forward to be of further service to you next week, Monday, DB, for another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. Do have a pleasant week, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, and may the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.